at Annapolis. In 1964, after graduating from the academy, he attended the Jet Aviation Flight Training Program. He served as a flight officer in the Vietnamese War, where he received the Air Medal, the Navy Commendation Medal, the Unit Commendation Ribbon, the National Defense Medal, and the Vietnam Unit Citation. On May 19, 1967, he was shot down just south of Hanoi while on a fighter cover mission. He was captured immediately and taken to the Hanoi prison complex. There he was tortured for military information. The next 5 years and 9 months, undergoing brutality, degradation, and humiliation, was spent at the hand of his captors. During this imprisonment, he distinguished himself among his fellow prisoners as a professional in underground communications. And I'm sure he'll be describing some of those instances to us. He was also known for his ready smile and good word. In 1970, he was appointed chaplain of his prison unit and served in that capacity for 2 years. He was repatriated on February 18, 1973, underwent medical and security debriefings, and returned to Kansas City on March 4th, where he was awarded the Purple Heart and the Silver Star. I don't know how many of you recall those particular days when the prisoners from Vietnam were returned to the United States, but I can't remember anything any more touching, anything more memorable as far as a history-making event. Some of those scenes that we watched live as families were reunited with their husbands who had been and fathers who had been away for so many months and years. Our speaker began making a series of public appearances, making over 400 during the first year he was back home. 400 in 1 year. There are only 365 days in a year, so you can see that he was a pretty busy man. He's spoken to religious, business, civic, and student groups from Albuquerque, New Mexico to Washington, D.C. His 4th of July speech appeared in the Congressional Record. He is the author of 2 books, I'm No Hero and The Last Domino, and writes articles for the Kansas City newspapers. Incidentally, he has informed me that if after hearing him speak today you're interested in the books that he has authored, he has provided some brochures on the registration table to tell you how you can get information concerning those 2 publications, I'm No Hero and The Last Domino. Our next speaker, Charlie Plumb.
As my old milk cow used to say on those cold December mornings, thanks for the warm hand. It's one of my favorite jokes. I don't like it. Hey, it's good to be here. I'm glad you came. I'm glad I came too. Because as I look around here and I look into your faces, you know, I was gone for a total of 7 years. A lot of things changed. The cars changed and the airplanes changed and the roads changed. A lot of things changed since I got over USA. You know what the biggest change of all was? High school girls are prettier. Right, guys? And the high school guys are more handsome. Right, girls? You know, I've spoken all over Oklahoma, a lot out in your panhandle section, a lot of the counties out there. I did a stint for the Farm Bureau 2 years ago and 3 years ago, and traipsed around this Sooner territory, and I love it down here. You know, it's just kind of a part of southern Kansas to me, but and you learn a lot. I ran into some farm boys out in the panhandle of Oklahoma, had a problem. This one kid told me about this problem he had bringing in the hay. He had a wagon load of hay, and he was bringing it home one evening, just about dark, and he came around the corner, and he turned that whole wagon of hay over in the ditch, and he was in trouble. I mean, it was a serious thing. He was out there, he was just loading that hay back on there and just grabbing that stuff and throwing it back on the wagon as fast as he could. And so a farmer came down and he put his hand around the guy and he said, "Hey, wait a minute, son. Don't get all excited there. Take it easy." The kid's just throwing his hay as fast as he can. He said, "Boy, my dad's really going to be mad." And the farmer says, "Now, just hold everything. Come on up to the house. We'll have some pie and some milk and we'll talk about it." And this kid said, "My dad's going to be awful mad." But the 2 of them went on up into the house there, and they had their pie and they had their milk, and the farmer finally turns to the boy and says, "Okay, now we can go load that hay." And, "Well, I'll just call your dad. Where is he?" And the kid said, He's under the hay. I spoke to the future farmers of America down in Texas last year, and they had a buffet line there, and one of the girls had shown up in this blouse, and it was a beautiful thing. It was a brown blouse with the brands of all of the ranches all over Texas. You know, they have the King Ranch down here and the Charlie Ranch over here. It's a beautiful blouse, and one old cowboy standing up against the wall looks at the other and he says, "Now that critter has sure been around." She's explaining it to her. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about my background, what I did as a teenager, what I thought about the situation in the world, and then a little bit about my POW experience and some philosophy maybe. And as we go through this, if you would, put questions you might have in the backs of your minds, and then after I'm through, well, you can come up and ask me some questions, and we'll talk about what you want to talk about. I grew up in a little bitty town in Kansas, a little town of some 325 souls, and a couple of Presbyterians. And I loved it there, you know. Guys, it was a nice place to grow up, and I kicked around that little town and learned to swim in the dirty old Call River down there. And I guess my claim to fame was that I graduated from that little grade school class. I graduated top of my class, or two. And the other guy wasn't all that bright, but I loved it there. And then I came up to high school there in the suburb of Kansas City and went away to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, where I was held prisoner. And I finally graduated from Annapolis, but not before I learned how to tie knots and send the Morse code, you know, and drive ships around. I was going to be a naval officer. And I learned a lot more there than that. And I suppose the most important thing I learned in Annapolis was from our commandant and midshipman, Charles Kirkpatrick, Uncle Charlie, as we called him, who really wanted a good football team. And you know, we showed up there in the early 1960s, and we just had a ragtag, a bunch of guys that really couldn't play the game very well. And Uncle Charlie used to get up in front of 4,000 midshipmen in front of these pep rallies, and he would clench his fist, and he could see the veins run his brow, and he would say, "You guys can do anything you set your minds to do. You guys can do anything you set your minds to do." You know what? We actually believed that. We thought we could do anything we set our minds to do. And for 4 years, we didn't know we could lose. And we didn't very often. We produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners, Joe Amino, Roger Staubach. We beat Army 4 times straight. You got any Dallas fans here? Yeah. He is a terrific guy, incidentally. I learned to know him personally because I was a photography editor for the team, and I traveled with the team, and Roger's just a prince of a guy. We beat Army 4 times straight. We were number 2 and rated number 1 team in the nation because we could do anything we set our minds to do, and it was the truth. I found out later that Uncle Charlie was an ant trainer. Yeah. Do we have any ant trainers in here? You guys don't know how to train ants? I got here just in time. You know what an ant trainer is? It's kind of like a beekeeper, you know? It's somebody that trains ants. And during my prisoner experience, I learned to do this. Because I needed something to eat, and it was either me or the ants, see? I mean, I wasn't eating ants. They were getting my food. And I'd leave a little morsel of bread out there, and the ants would crawl away with it. So I learned a little bit about ants. And I became an ant trainer myself. And I can prove to you that I can train ants. And if you go home tonight and you find a little trail of ants crawling along your bed, try this. I swear it'll work. You see these ants are very happy, 2 by 2, marching along there. Take a piece of paper. We'd use a leaf. But you can take a piece of paper and put it right over their trail, see? Now, they'll be a little squeamish at first, and they'll go out around your paper. And then a couple of these ants get real brave, and they'll go right across the top of your paper, see? rest of them will follow. And after they've been nice and comfortable with your bridge, going across that bridge, pick that thing up, turn it halfway around, and set it back down. Now, see what happens? The ants coming down this way, they all turn around and they go back. Well, I don't know why. They think it's a one-way street, see, going the wrong way. But it really works. And by doing this, I can keep them away from my bread, see? That's pretty important. I didn't realize what was happening until I came back home and went to the library to try to find out why ants do this. As it turns out, now this is scientific. As it turns out, every ant on the floor, on the wall, on the ceiling, is leaving behind a microscopic droplet of fluid. Okay, everywhere he goes, he's leaving along a little trail of fluid. It's just like a drop. It has a point on one end and a bulb on the other end, see? And so the ants come along, can pick up, can sense these microscopic drops of the guy in front of them and tell which way he was going. Now that may seem a little insignificant to you, but there's a real story here about ant trainers. And I want to tell you about some of the ant trainers that I've known. Because I think we're all in this situation, you know. We walk along and nobody's ever been that direction before, and so all the little microscopic droplets are coming the other way, see, and we don't think we can go that way. Back in the early 1950s, there was a med student in England. And he got up one morning, he looked at his roommate and he said, you know what I think I can do? I think I can run 5,280 feet in 240 seconds. And the guy said, Roger, you can't do that. Nobody's ever done that before. You know, 10,000 years recorded history. Nobody's ever broken the 4-minute mile. And so he went to his college professors and all the doctors. And he said, Doctor, do you think it's possible? Can the human body actually traverse a mile in 4 minutes? And the doctor said, well, we don't know, but probably not. Your heart would probably just pump right out of your chest, and your lungs would just burn up, probably. You see what's happening? See, all these microscopic droplets are coming his way, and they say, go back, you'll never do it. But in 1954, on the 6th of May, and I get chills every time I think about this, Roger Bannister ran a mile in 3 minutes, 59.6 seconds. That's not the end of the story. The exciting part of the story was that 6 weeks later, Lindy of Australia did the same thing. And the next week, somebody else did it. Next week, somebody else did it. And to this time, over 500 people have ran a mile in less than 4 minutes. See what's happened? See, Bannister was the first little ant, and he went that direction. He left the trail. And he thought he could do it. Nobody else did. He was an ant trainer. Well, graduated from Annapolis, went to flight training in Florida, Texas, Southern California. I learned to fly the F-4B Phantom jet. What an airplane that is. The supersonic interceptor goes over 1,400 miles an hour, weighs over 60,000 pounds. It's a long way from a John Deere tractor, I'll tell you that. and then I learned to land that beauty on a boat. Yeah, an aircraft carrier. You know, a ship out there in the oceans that's bigger than this entire auditorium with over 5,000 men aboard, and we landed on top of that ship. Now, the way we did this was pretty easy. You just drop a hook from the tail of the airplane, and you fly in there real low, and you pick up a cable, a big old steel cable about that big around. You pick up that cable, and it pays out, and it stretches, and it stops you, if you're lucky. Now, if you're not so lucky, see, you add full power on your airplane, those jet engines start to crank up, and you lift off again, and you come back around, and you try it one more time, if you've still got some gas. Now, my old buddy, Andy Mountain, from outside Wichita, Kansas, as a matter of fact, came in one night, and he had problems. He had several problems. One thing was, it was dark out there. There wasn't any moon or stars. It was overcast condition, and he was trying to find that ship. He didn't have anything to look at but a gyro here that told him he was going up or he was going down. And he had an airspeed indicator over here that told him he was going fast or he was going slow. And then he came into that ship, and he finally located the ship. And it located him, and he came in, he's flying on these instruments, trying to come down there a little closer, but he got a little fast, and he was a little heavy, and those two combinations of mass and velocity meant what? Momentum, right? He came down, he picked up that hook, all right, dropped it down, he picked up that wire, stretched it all the way to the edge of that ship, and flopped right over the side. Now he's hanging in the wire, see? He's just hanging there, the nose of his airplane is just draping in and out of the waves. Now meanwhile, aboard that airplane, Andy can't figure this thing out. He's looking down at those instruments, see? And it says he's going straight down. At 0 miles an hour. He says, I must be alive. I got to be still flying. He just adds full power. Now the jet engine starts to crank up, see? And it starts to pick up the seaweed and the fish and the water, and it's spraying it all over the ship. Now meanwhile, the captain's down on the bridge. He's getting drenched with all this garbage. He finally wipes enough of it off to reach the microphone and say, hey, Andy, you're hanging on the edge of the boat, man. Pull the power back. So Andy pulls the power back. The jet engine starts to slow down, and they take a crane over there, and they pick up the airplane with Andy, and they set it back aboard that ship. Well, my co-pilot and I flew some 75 combat missions over there. 75 times we took off from that ship and landed safely, and then with just 5 days from going home, we were 5 days from the end of our cruise, we took off for a very important target. It was a missile assembly dump just south of the Hanoi. We flew to the target, and about 20 miles south of that target, that airplane was hit by a surface-to-air missile. That missile exploded to some 12,000 pounds of gasoline we had aboard. It sent that airplane topsy-turvy, end over end, down towards that right pad. We found ourselves upside down, going down at 500 miles an hour, just a screaming fireball ahead from the ground. Well, the co-pilot was getting a little concerned. He was. I could tell because he was talking to me in a voice about 2 octaves higher than normal. He said, you want to get out, Charlie? I said, wait a minute. I got this extra special problem today. Now, the way you normally got on a jet airplane, you know, is with an ejection seat. You got the picture? Now, see, we were upside down. So I said, Andy, we got to turn this airplane upright. I grabbed the stick. I had the on controls of the airplane. I grabbed the stick, and it was frozen. I'd lost all my hydraulic pressure. And we were going down fast. The only manual control I had in that airplane was a rudder. I hit that rudder as hard as I could, and I said a prayer as loud as I could. The airplane shuddered. It rolled back upright where I ejected. My co-pilot ejected, and we came floating down over enemy territory. Boy, I looked up at that parachute. Big white silk canopy holding me in the sky. Was I happy? I always wondered if it was going to work. I mean, you know, all the automatic features there, the rocket and the timing devices and the electronics and the opening of the parachute, and it all worked just as advertised. And I really breathed a sigh of relief because it's tough to get a refund on a parachute. I tried this thing once, and I looked over my co-pilot. He was in pretty good shape. I then bowed my head and said a prayer. I'd always been a religious boy, and I was in hopes that the good Lord above was going to be the old Charlie Plumb in this problem that I had. And yet I didn't pray for any great miracle wind to whisk me back out to sea, or a couple of eagles to pick up our parachutes and dump us back on the boat. I just prayed for the guts that it was going to take to endure whatever challenge the Lord had for me. Well, I drifted on down Grand. I was captured immediately. I was stripped of everything I had. They took my flight gear, they took my clothing, they even took my name. They gave me a Vietnamese name to use for the next 6 years. They dragged me around completely nude through those camps, and they threw rocks at me and hit me with sticks, and finally into Hanoi, the capital city, where I was tortured for military information and for political propaganda. The first question they asked me was, what's the next target to be hit by your air wing? And I told them I didn't know. Well, they got me up bright and early the next morning and asked me the same question. I was tortured that night for that information. Didn't give in. They got me up bright and early the next morning and asked me the same question. I gave them the same answer. I don't know what the next target's going to be. I was tortured again. The third time they came around with those ropes and irons, Charlie Plumb was getting smart. I decided honesty might not be the best policy in a communist country. I decided to create for them the biggest, fattest lie I could dream of. So I did. And the next time they asked me that question with a very straight face, I looked them right in the eye and I said, the next target to be hit by my air wing is going to be the Hanoi Brewery. And they believed it. I told them it was a great plot by the CIA to destroy the morale of their troops by cutting off all their beer. I thought it would work in the U.S. Army. You know, why not? They actually believed this. And they went away and they set up their anti-air defenses around their brewery while my air wing hit the bridge. But that was the first indication I got of how naive these people were. They weren't stupid by any means. They weren't dumb. They were just naive. They were terribly sheltered by this veil of communism. And you know, as long as I was over there, I never ever saw a magazine, a newspaper, I never heard a song, I never saw a matchbook cover or a billboard that didn't deal directly with communist propaganda. Can you imagine that? They don't have any home and garden magazines or popular mechanics over there. It's all propaganda. Unbelievable. But you see, that's all these people know. From age 1, they grow up being fed only what their government wants them to know. Well, that ended the torture for a while. They put me into a little bitty cell. That cell was 8 feet long and 8 feet wide. I'll never forget it. I could draw you a diagram of what each one of those dirty old walls look like today. And I paced 3 steps one way and 3 steps the other, and just about went stir crazy in that cell. I'm telling you, I mean, imagine no TV or radio or window to look out, nobody to talk to. I was clawing walls after just a few days. And then I finally decided, Charlie, you got to get a hold of yourself, man. You got to do something. I decided I'll make a little deck of playing cards, and I did. I constructed these playing cards about the size of postage stamps, and I tore them from 52 little strips of toilet paper. And I can tell you this, friends. It's tough to shuffle toilet paper. Well, I was in that cell about 2 weeks, without a word from anybody. I was kind of lonely in there, and yet I suppose for the very first time in my life, I was completely on my own. I was completely independent. That's something we all kind of want to do, right? That's kind of one of our goals in life, is to be independent. We don't want our folks paying our way, or, we don't want the government handing us anything. We want to be independent. And I suppose for the very first time in my life, man, I was it. I had me to depend upon and nobody else. And I got the feeling, well, this is kind of a good feeling at first, and then I thought, well, I don't know if I can really hack this or not. And I'm sure going to give it a go, because old Uncle Charlie told me that I can do anything I set my mind to do, and I'm going to set my mind to do it. Well, I was in that cell about 2 weeks, without a word from anyone. And then one evening, I was sitting on the board, I called my bed. I heard in the far corner the chirping noise of a cricket, just a little chirp over there. I knew what it was. I'd been a farm boy, and anyway, it had all varieties of bugs and snakes and rats in that cell. Some were friendlier than others. But one cricket didn't bug me a bit. So I sat there and listened to that, and then the more that cricket chirped, the more rhythmic that sound became, and I thought, now that's a pretty educated little critter. Maybe I can teach him to sing. I walked over to the corner to investigate this cricket sound, and I found there no cricket at all. The little piece of wire was not 4 inches long, I guess, and it came out a hole at the base of that cell wall, and it was scratching very gingerly on my concrete floor, making this chirping noise like a cricket. Well, I looked down there, the thing bobbing in and out. I knew 2 things. I knew, first of all, that the cell next to mine was just a storeroom with boxes and shovels and ropes, nothing else. The closest American was in the cell all the way on the other side of that storeroom. But then the second thing I knew was that the North Vietnamese were just not sophisticated enough to poke a wire through that hole and expect me to bite on the other side. So I gathered all the courage I could. And I very carefully reached down and I tugged on that little wire 3 times. And that little wire tugged back 3 times. Now that was the most exciting thing that happened to me in weeks. I stepped back away from that little hole in the wall, I wiped the sweat off my hands, and I said, Charlie, gotta be brave about this now. And I gritted my teeth, and I gulped a couple of times, and I reached down, and I closed my eyes, and I tugged on that little wire 4 times. You guessed it, that little wire tugged back 4 times. Well, at that point, I decided, now listen, you got to take a military analysis of all of this. You got to go back through all of your education, all of your schooling, and come up with a decision. And I did. I put all the facts and figures together of this situation. I determined that on the other end of that wire was some form of intelligent life. And I was going to find out what it was. It's only one logical thing to do, right? I'm sure any mature person in this room would have done exactly the same thing, right? Tugged 5 times. I reached down and tugged 5 times on the wire, and it disappeared. Right back to that rabbit hole. That's what I said. Oh no. You thought they weren't sophisticated enough to trick you. It looks like they just did. I sat back down on that board, fully expecting a swarm of guards to come in there and beat me up again, but they didn't come. And about 15 minutes later, back came the cricket. And this time, this little wire had a note wrapped around the end of it, and the note was written on a dirty old piece of toilet paper in ink made from ashes. At least I thought that's what it was. I can barely make it out, but it was in English, and it did say, memorize this code, then eat this note. I can tell you this, the code was easier to memorize than the note was to eat. But I did both things, and then I checked the door, because the guards had told me I wasn't supposed to communicate with any other American. In fact, that was rule number 1 on the camp regulations, was that we were not even supposed to look at another American. Consider that. You've been talking about your freedoms today with Mr. Coach. You're going to talk more about it this afternoon. Think about that freedom. You know, we've got freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and worship and the news and everything of that freedom. Just the ability to look into another American face, well, they didn't want us doing that. So I checked that door very carefully. I sneaked back to the hole in the wall. I started tugging on that little wire, and on the other end of the wire I found Lieutenant Commander Bob Shoemaker. Now, Shue had been in prison for 2.5 years when I got there. And it's been a good long number just of those years and weeks and months and endless hours piecing together little bits of wire until he could stuff that wire out a hole in his cell wall, run it over the boxes, around the shovels, through the rope 14 feet away into that little hole in my cell wall, some 14 feet. Wow, it's phenomenal. You'd undergone hardship, brutality, torture just to contact another American. And he finally got a hold of it. It was me. You know what the first question he asked me? He said, who won the World Series? Then he said, what do the cars look like these days? And is America still really there? 2.5 years in prison without a word from home. The guy was just homesick. He just curious as to what was going on back in good old USA. Well, I built him as best I could. And he was mighty happy to get that information. But he passed me back some things which were 100 times more valuable. He said, Charlie, he said, I'm going to teach you to be a prisoner of war. He said, it's not much fun around here at first, old buddy, but I can tell you what the secrets of survival are. I said, tell me, Bob. That's about it with this place, buddy. He said, the first thing you need around here is faith. He said, I'm not a preacher. He said, I'm not going to proselytize. I'm just going to tell you, if you don't have faith in God, you're probably not going to walk out of here. It's going to bury you. Or right here in North Carolina. He said, the second thing you need is commitment. He said, you remember your hometown and your school teachers and your mom and your pa and that flag? He said, whatever America is to you, buddy, get committed to it and love it. He He said, the third thing you're going to need while you're here is Pride. I said, pride? He said, that's right, pride. I said, Bob, I'm bleeding from 3 places on my body. Haven't had a square meal in weeks. I've got all kinds of diseases around here, and I'm lonely. Now tell me, what am I going to be proud of? He said, you be proud you're an American, and don't you ever make an excuse for being an American. I said, okay, Bob, think about those things: faith, commitment, and pride. And I found that those 3 factors were more important than the rice that we ate or the water we drank in that communist prison camp. Well, guards came in just a few nights later. They had another question they wanted to ask me, and I was in trouble, because I knew that they knew the answer to this one. They asked me what was the base that I flew from, and it had been written right on my parachute, USS Kitty Hawk, right across my back. Pretty tricky. So I knew that. I thought they were trying to check on my answer, see, and so I looked up and I said, I better play this one straight, and I said, I flew off the USS Kitty Hawk. That was my base. That's a lie, they said. They slapped me around and kicked me over in the corner. They said, that's not true. We know you couldn't have done that. And I said, no, that's the truth. That was my base, the USS Kitty Hawk. They slapped me around some more and they said, now tell us the truth. We know you couldn't have taken off from the Kitty Hawk. To fly a big old airplane like that, you got to have a runway that's at least a mile long. It was time for another lie. So once again, with a very straight face, I looked him right in the eye and said, I wasn't lying to you at all. You see, we got a lot of ships out there in the 7th Fleet. We just line them all up. And they believe that one, too. Well, once again, please understand me. I'm really not trying to poke fun at those people because they're intelligent people. But you see, they're so shrouded by this veil of communism that they live under that they really don't know anything about the Western world. Well, that ended the torture again. They tossed me in the back of a truck. They bound me and gagged me. I had my feet tied together. I had my arms behind my back. I had an old sock wrapped around my eyes as a blindfold. I had another old sock in my mouth. Ew. Was that a dirty sock? It was a dirty sock. I knew it was a dirty sock because it was my sock. And he tossed me in the back of a truck. And I was back there with a bunch of other Americans, 23 of us as a matter of fact. We had 23 Americans, 2 guards, and a dog in the back of that truck, little bitty old truck. We bounced around all night long. And finally, by the early morning light, I had learned to squint my eyebrows until I had that old sock right up there at the top of my brow, and I could see out underneath the blindfold. I could see out into the countryside of Vietnam, and it was truly beautiful. Really, really pretty. The greenery and the streams and the mountains and the sea and pretty landscape. And then we drove through some little towns, and those little towns weren't so beautiful. They were filled with peasants who were impoverished and diseased and lonely. They had no facilities for sewage or water. The government had taken their taxes and given them nothing in return except one thing. You know what it was? That was a speaker. A big old speaker that was 10 or 12 feet across, and it was up on a tree or on a pole or on a ledge, and it had a wire in the back of the speaker, and the wire ran off from tree to tree and pole to pole, and finally into Hanoi, where they were pumping out, guess what, the Communist Party line. That speaker blared on with speeches and reading some Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh, and in the evening they played marches and tried to pep these people up to get involved with the communist system. And it was a technique of brainwash because the peasants couldn't adjust the volume on the speaker. The peasants couldn't shut that thing off. And as I bounced around the back of that truck, just as hog-tied as a guy could be, I thought to myself, boy, I'm glad I'm free. I thought, what do you mean? Well, I'm glad I'm free. I'm glad I've got that little hometown in Kansas where we don't have a big old speaker out there that I can't turn on. I'm glad I can vote for more than one person at a time when it comes to election day, and I'm glad I can carry a sign around if I don't like the way the government's treating me. I'll go out and march. You can't march in Vietnam. You know what happens when you march in North Vietnam? That's not a demonstration. It's a revolution. They carry you off to jail. They just redefined it. When you march in the streets of Hanoi, it's a revolution. And so they carry you off to jail. And I thought of those things as I bounced along in the back of that truck. And I thought to myself, whatever this freedom thing is, and I can't really define it for you all that well, whatever we've got here, and it may not be faultless, but it's sure way ahead of whatever's in second place. Well, we got to new camp. They gave me a roommate. It was great to have someone I could talk to and pray with. And they put us into a little bitty cell. The cell wasn't any nicer than the first one I was in. We had no books to read or TV to watch or radio or telephone to talk on. There was a hole high in one wall. The hole was about the size of a shoebox, see? And it let in a little bit of air and a little bit of light, and I knew I could crawl up and get in that hole. One afternoon, I heard some coughing from outside, and I wanted to check it out. I asked my cellmate to go guard the door, and he peeked through a little crack and he said, "Okay, Charlie, it's clear." And I hoisted myself up into this hole in the wall, and I looked over the edge, and in a little jungle garden down there, I could see an American. A smiling American face, a guy that was waving at me and giving me some very strange hand signals. The first one he gave me looked just like that. And then he gave me that one. And then he gave me one that looked like that. Boy, was I confused. And like you are. The fourth one he gave me, now some of you have got this already, the fourth signal like that. Yeah, you got it. See, he was giving me an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. See how that looks like? K? Well, kind of. I couldn't figure it out either, but he went through it twice, see? And I found out that he couldn't make a sound out there for fear of being caught by a guard, but he developed a code. Code where he formed his hands into letters, put those letters into words, and words into sentences so that we could communicate silently. Well, I watched him, and then I practiced all night long, and then the next day he came in. And when he did, I hopped up into that bin hole, propped my elbows in the corner, we started to communicate with our hands. We talked about the sick and injured. First thing we did, we set up a prayer list so we could pray for the guys who were in trouble. We talked about the camp organization and all of the names of the various buildings, and finally, I just couldn't take the suspense. I had to ask him the logical question. I spelled out, "Hey, Bill, where are you from?" And he looked back up at me and he sort of smiled and he spelled out, K, A, N, S, A, S. And I sent back, "I thought I recognized the accent." I found a man from Kansas. Captain Ed Hubbard was not only from Kansas, he was from old hometown. We'd gone to the same high school. Imagine that. 10,000 miles away from home, you can't get away from alum. I'm telling you, we replayed every football game that team ever played. We talked about every cheerleader ever had, too. We had a lot of fun just thinking about home. Well, in 1970, our treatment took a great change for the better. Food got better. We were allowed outside a few minutes each day. Great to see the sunshine again. A couple of guys got letters from home. We didn't know why. It wasn't until we returned home and found out what was going on back in the States that we figured out why our treatment had improved over there. 1970. That's when you saw all the bracelets, the POW bracelets, with all the names of all the POWs. Just like that, with my name on there. In fact, I've gotten a lot of these from Oklahoma kids that wore these beauties around for years. But they didn't know me from Adam, see? And yet over 10,000 of these things had my name on them. Well, that and the bumper stickers. Remember those bumper stickers said, "POWs never have a nice day." And the letters from the schools, and the prayers in the churches, and the delegations from Washington, D.C. All of these things proved to the Vietnamese people that we were important. That we weren't just a run-of-the-mill type person that they have over there with no value, but an American has a value. They finally understood that and began to improve our treatment. I know that many of you are involved in that. You wore the bracelets and said the prayers, and your brothers and sisters and teachers were involved in that to bring the POWs home. And I want to say thanks, because it meant my help to me and the lives of many of my buddies. And I want to also point out that probably more than in the last 2 decades, and as Joe told you, it was one of the happiest times that we've seen around here for a long time, and more than any single event, we were all pulling the same direction on the same rope, right? All Americans wanted to bring those POWs home and finally get that Vietnam War over with. And sure enough, we found out, right? We found out we can do anything we set our minds to do. Well, I don't have any great political philosophy for you today, folks. I wish I did. I wish I could come up here and tell you what the solutions to all the problems in America are. I wish I could give you a cookbook recipe for how to live a better life. But I think I can point out 2 or 3 things to you. One of them is those 3 factors that helped me survive that prison camp: faith in God, commitment to this United States of America, and pride in myself as an American, were the 3 things that helped me through that problem and will help you through any problem in life that you encounter. And old Uncle Charlie telling me that I could do anything I set my mind to do. And that ant story about the ant trainer, so many times in our life, we get all this garbage tossed at us, all these little microscopic droplets saying we can't go that way. We can't build a better penal system in Oklahoma. We can't set up a system of government in Washington which is free of corruption. They all tell us these things, right? And it's just like the old ant story. All it takes is one person, and that one person could be in this room today. Let's break for a couple of questions. Just a few minutes and a couple of questions. Anybody have anything? I'll talk about anything you want to talk about. Step up to that microphone, folks. I haven't had a question I couldn't answer for a long time. Now wait, that's not true. I better tell you the question I cannot answer. I got this question just a few weeks ago in where was I? In Missouri somewhere. And a guy could have been 6 or 7 years old. He came up to the microphone, he looked up at me, and he gave me a question I could not answer. He said, "Commander Plumb, what did you do when you ran out of toilet paper?" Yes, sir, your question.
What town in Kansas are you from?
The little town is called Lecompton, Kansas. It's near Lawrence, right on the Colorado River. Yes, sir.
First of all, what were the years that you were in the field at?
I was a field editor from 1967 to 1973.
Okay, and then my question is, how did you find out that we landed on the moon, and how did you feel?
Okay, good question. I was telling you about all the propaganda that they gave us. You know, the only way we found out anything was reading between the lines. One day we got a newspaper message written in English from their local newspaper, and the headline was, "The U.S. is finally beaten in the space race. Soviet Union takes the lead again." This was late 1969. This is like December of 1969. Okay, and I thought, well, I've been kind of involved in the space race. In fact, I had been a candidate for the astronaut program before I was shot down. And so I was quite interested in the space race. And I looked down at that and I said, wait a minute, the U.S. has been beaten in the space race. I've got to read this. And it said, "The Soviet Union has finally trounced the U.S. in the space race. Not since Sputnik 1 has Russia been farther ahead. Russia has sent a vehicle to the moon, gathered samples, taken pictures, blasted off, came all the way back to the Earth, and unlike the United States, they didn't have to put a man aboard to control the vehicle." And I had to read that again. I said, wait a minute. Unlike the United States, they didn't have to put a man aboard to control the vehicle. I couldn't believe it. And I tapped the guys next to me. This is 1969. See, when I was shot down, our projected date for the moon landing was 1972. This was 3 years ahead of schedule. And I tapped the guys next door, and I said, do you read this the same way I do? And I read tapped the whole thing through to them, and I heard this whoop next door and a holler, and sure enough, we had landed on the moon. And I can tell you that was one of the biggest morale boosts we had, is when we read that in between the lines, that the U.S. had finally landed on the moon. Yes, sir.
Known about President Carter's pardoning of draft evaders in the 60s, would you still have been as committed as you were?
Guys, that's a good question. Would I have been as committed had I known about the president's pardoning of the draft dodgers? Yes, I think so. The pardoning of the draft dodgers is not the first philanthropic thing that a president has ever done. Now, Korea was not a Vietnam. I think we had a lot more support for Korea, but after the Korean War, there were 21 soldiers who we called turncoats, the 21 turncoats, and you may remember in your history books, I remember from seeing it on TV in 1954, that these guys decided to go to China and not come back to the United States. What do you suppose the outcome of those 21 guys turned out to be? They all decided, everyone, the 21 guys decided they didn't like China very much at all. They wanted to come back home. And so we let them come back home. We put them back into society, and we paid them for the time that they were gone. Believe that? It's a fact. We paid those guys for being turncoats. Now, nobody really, that wasn't brought out in the newspapers very, very much, as was the Vietnam thing, because the press didn't really pick up on things like that back in the early 50s, but they do now. And yet, what I'm telling you is this, that I knew about that before I went to war. I knew that America was not necessarily going to come down real hard on the guys that didn't have the commitment that I did. I felt it was a moral obligation, and I felt that everyone in the United States has that same obligation. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, it's obvious that readjusted to society rather well. But when you first came back, did you have any mental blocks about the war? And if you did, how did you overcome it?
Okay, when I first came back, did I have any mental blocks against the war? No, none at all. Never had any. I don't wake up at nights, I don't think of suicide, none of that stuff that you might suspect. And I don't know why. I think it's just because of my own personal philosophy. I'm a positive thinker. And anytime I see a problem, I know that within that problem is the seed of the solution to the problem. And I look at my 6 years as a prisoner of war as being advantageous to me. Sure, it wasn't much fun over there, but a lot of things have come of that 6 years which have been very beneficial. And I have improved myself. I'm a better man because I was over there. So no problem. Yes?
Yes, sir. When you were over there, how did you get your exercise? Living in the hospital.
Okay, exercise. We did everything. We did push-ups and sit-ups and running in place and isometrics. And it was tough because the Vietnamese didn't want us to be strong. They didn't want us to exercise at all. But we had quite a program going. And we were pretty physically fit. In fact, let me tell you how this country takes care of its own. I have been out of the regular military now since 1974. Been out for 3 years, nearly 4. And yet every year I go back to Pensacola, Florida for a complete physical, and they make sure that I haven't picked up any bugs over there in that POW camp that we can't cure. And but I came back in good physical shape. In fact, right back on flight status, and I am currently in the flight status with the Navy Reserves. Yes, sir.
Okay, how did you feel upon arrival, and how did you feel about the treaty that ended the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, and how did you feel about the way we arrived at it, and now do you favor the admission of Vietnam to the United Nations and the normalization of relations?
Okay, good question. And we'll just have 2 more questions, these 2 ladies right here. How did I feel about the treaty? I was disappointed with the treaty. I was disappointed with the way the war ended, but I was happy to see the whole thing come to a conclusion. My view of that whole war was that we got into it for a proper motive. We were right in going to Vietnam. And after that, after we were there, we made every mistake in the book. The biggest mistake that we made was to prop up unsupported leaders, unpopular men and women from 1963 right on through to the end of the war. Were given money by the United States, we were given supplies, we were giving them armament, and they were not popular leaders. Had they been popular leaders, we would probably never have lost that war. But we kept supplying people and propping them up, and they were not interested in saving their country. For the most part, they were interested in building a Swiss bank account from our money, and that was our biggest mistake. Yes?
Yes, sir. Were you married when you were over there?
Yes.
How did that affect your marriage? You're being gone and coming back.
Okay. Yeah, good question. It was a big problem, as a matter of fact, with over 60% of the POWs who came back to divorces, and I was one of them. I married my high school sweetheart after I graduated from Annapolis. She held on for 5 long years, and they were long years in her life, because she didn't know if I was alive or dead, if I'd ever come back home. She had no idea. Then, 3 months before I was repatriated, she filed for divorce. And so after I came home, I granted her divorce, she remarried, and I was remarried 4 months ago. I'm still on my honeymoon. A terrifically tough problem, and if any of you girls think you could hang on in a situation like that, it was really tough. And I have the utmost respect for my ex-wife in how she did hang on for so long, because it was tough. Yes, ma'am. Last question.
Do you think there are equal CFAs in Vietnam?
Okay, another tough question. How about the MIAs, the missing in action, over 900 men that we still don't know what happened to? My best guess, and I hope I'm wrong, is that there are no living Americans in Vietnam. I hope I'm wrong about that. But from what I went through and from the politics that I know of it, I just don't believe that there are any men living over there today. 6 years is a long time to go through an experience like that. I wouldn't wish it on any of you here at all. But I can tell you that some of the same problems in your life and in this country will be the problems we had over there. Frustration, humiliation, loneliness, boredom. We find ourselves imprisoned in our minds, right? Imprisoned by alcohol or drugs or a negative attitude or fear. How do you break the imprisonment? Shoemaker said it: faith, commitment, pride. I want to leave you with those three things and tell you that I spent a lot of time over there trying to figure out what I was doing in Vietnam. And I thought, I'd fight for America. I thought, well, what's this thing you're fighting for? Well, it's the amber ways of grain, the purple mountain majesties, it's the Congress on the hill, it's the policeman out here on the highway. And then for 2,103 days, I thought about my America, and I kind of redefined it. My America now turns out to be a fuzzy-top kid that gets out here on his bicycle and he slings newspapers in driveways. My America turns out to be a little girl that comes rushing up to her daddy and hugs him when he comes home from work. My America is a truck driver that sits up there in his cab and motions me across an intersection when I've forgotten to stop for the sign. And my America turns out to be a bunch of teenagers from Oklahoma that gathered here for one day to re-pledge yourselves to this American system. A gang that's not afraid of that mountain. A gang that's willing to discipline yourselves just a little bit more to help me make this an even better America. So don't you see what it all boils down to the very basics? My definition for America turns out to be you. And I'm proud to be a part of such a wonderful America as you. Thank you very much.
Please remain standing. Charlie didn't mention this, but I'll tell you something else that he spent 2,103 days doing. He's come back to hear someone sing happy birthday to him. This is Charlie Plumb's birthday, and we're going to sing happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Charlie. Happy birthday to you. I don't know if he heard that 6 times while he was in Vietnam, but we are happy that he's back and we can hear it again here. I know that you've all been moved by this particular presentation, as I have been, and I always am when I hear him or Colonel Reisner, General Reisner speak, and these are the kinds of programs that we think are very, very important for you here. But it's time for us to feed something else, and we have a meal. We have a meal provided for you in the Great Hall. Please listen for the instructions as far as that meal is concerned. There are restrooms between here and the Great Hall. You'll go through the these glass doors here if you need to stop off at the restroom. As I said at this end, and also I said at the other end, you need to stop off at the restroom. If you'll bear to the left as you go out this doorway on around to the other end of the Marriott, you'll see